Hello, and welcome to a replaying of Universal Analytics Greatest Hits. This is a redo from the Marketing Analytics Summit, June 21st, 2023 in Las Vegas, Nevada. Let's get started. So my name is Sarah Hoffman. I grew up in web development. And yes, that does mean that I started my analytics practice and training with log files. I started with web trends, just so y'all know. When I switched over to Google Analytics, way back when, I wanted to also get some credentials. So I made sure that I got trained by the folks over at Lunametrics, now Bounteous. Hey, that's where I work. I am also a DAA board member and encourage you all to check out their offerings with the digitalanalyticsassociation.org. So most of all, I'm an analytics nerd and I'm generally a consultant. And to quote Jim Stern, you are a full stack of awesomeness. And he held that quote true through this presentation as well. So pretty pleased about that. Did y'all know, were you aware that Universal Analytics is going away? I didn't know at all. That's, as I'm recording that, two days from now, 3 days from now, your standard Universal Analytics is going to expire. It's going to turn into read-only. You're a little bit more fortunate if you are a GA360 customer and you have until July 1st of 2024, so a full year where your Universal Analytics will still be processing data. Otherwise, everything will be read-only, which is kind of a bummer, primarily because both sets of analytics platforms, you'll need to export your data by July of 2024. And that by far has been the most difficult thing to consult around and recommend, how folks export. What do folks need to export? Do you need all of your website traffic data from 2012? I don't think so. That was 3 CMS and 12 site redesigns ago. Do we still have our users, using the same things? Are they achieving the same goals? Probably so, if you're e-commerce. Maybe have some purchase data, some e-commerce conversion rates related to some of your A/B tests or whatever else is going on. But, the web isn't your archive. It isn't a history of your organization. That's what webarchive.org is for, and the Wayback Machine. How your KPIs changed is what you need to report on. What was your check engine lights saying in 2012, in 2015, even in 2020? Do you have a little bit of pre-COVID look during COVID? And then what happened afterwards? Do you have that picture? That's probably the most recent picture that you'll need. You don't need everything, and it's hard to tell people. So we may ask ourselves, how did we get here? Our little buddy Urchin was tracking the web back in the 1990s, and Google bought him. Google bought this little blue dude and probably said, we're trying to block bots, so maybe we don't need some sort of creepy device, creepy code, that type of file name deployed across everybody's analytics. So from Urchin came all the amalgamations of Google Analytics, come far, not just in logo design, but across the board in many flavors and improvements across the platform itself. My favorite of all the fave icons is this little blue guy up here at the top. That one was my favorite for sure. So that being said, we didn't really want to have urchin.js somewhere on, someone's site. So we moved into ga.js, analytics.js, and now we're in this GTag land. Those kind of translate to, classic universal analytics in GA4. We don't talk about app plus web. And if I could write a song, I would write a song. So, one of my charges to you throughout this presentation is, if you can write lyrics, please write a version of We Don't Talk About Bruno to We Don't Talk About App plus web. Pretty please. I think the world needs this. So we're letting the days go by. We're letting that clock wind down. And Google is not letting us forget this. And, I took this screenshot for my presentation last week. And as I'm retelling this to you, that clock now says 2 days and some hours, minutes, and seconds. So the clock is definitely winding down. The time is ticking away, and you need to hit publish. So when we came to Universal Analytics, we got confronted with this beautiful statement of all website data. Why is it all website data? Even when you make a mobile Universal Analytics site, it was still all website data. Even the AP style book agreed that website was one word. That happened in 2009, before Universal Analytics really came into being. Yet we have, this residual fun. Then we started getting into naming conventions and all sorts of filters and views. As a consultant with many clients, we get, some craziness coming at us. I'm really concerned why this particular client was testing something in an unfiltered view. That's your raw data, folks. That shouldn't be messed with. That shouldn't be filtered in any way. So why are you testing it? I don't know. It scares me. Then we get into other sorts of, fun numerical naming conventions that almost seem a little nonsensical. But for the most part, they represent parts of the site that, we either had some control over or no control over. How these areas were tracked, who knows? Cvent is still a pain in the butt. And then we get into this magical configuration here, where we still are using, Z underscore to indicate that something is archival or historic or not in use today. This basically just means that it automatically goes to the bottom of the list when you're searching through the apps and properties. Then we get into our views themselves. We had a lot of headaches and heartaches when it came to the way that user ID came out in the Universal Analytics landscape. Loads of different tests and trial and errors. I don't know if you guys know who Sid is, but I don't. And I certainly don't know what Sid was testing. But one of the happy things that did come out was, change history. Super pleased to have that across both the account and the property. This is going to be a super, super important area within GA4. More things are configurable and for, coining a new word, mess upable for, how your site is administered with GA4. There are a lot more things that someone can do accidentally within this admin panel. But now we at least get little inklings of what it is that was changed and who changed it. It's been very helpful. because in certain situations, there were a lot of different things that Google had at the user level. So if I built a segment that was critical to a custom report, um, and I shared it out, hopefully both of us, whoever I shared it with are still, employed at said company. But, if I happen to leave, maybe that can disappear. It definitely can. And there's, little to no way of recreating that. Suffice to say that, unless the IT at your organization can, resurrect, an email account and log someone back in, um, to then share or recreate or see the underpinnings, you're a little bit SOL in terms of how certain types of information are populated and getting sent out. The Gallery of Wonders. This is also a place where that individual, user-based settings really came into effect, where, we had industry leaders that were creating these dashboards, creating these segments and custom reports so that you could walk into a new company and, get started. You weren't walking in, with nothing for the solutions gallery. Um, that's kind of how we're, set up within GA4. However, we've got a little bit more leeway with the library and with, some of the report creation techniques that are available, but we're still missing some ability to share those. And that is a big miss. And, hopefully that can get prioritized and, come of age for GA4, where, we can share reports to other properties, share reports to sub properties for GA360 folks, and, figure out how best to govern and manage, reports from a property level as opposed to an individual level. Super important for us. Oh, behavior flow. This was my least favorite area. And I think there's probably a tweet out there somewhere of Krista Seiden and I um, going back and forth about how much we hated this Sankey chart. It actually made me hate Sankey charts. It, isn't a good representation of how someone uses your web page. And in this case, it truly was web page. I'm not saying that just for funsies. Um, you know, the actual pathing and analysis that went behind some of the real Sankey charts, takes data scientists, it takes BigQuery, it takes a load of SQL, but this was just a cheap imitation. And I am glad to see that the Explore reports in GA4 and the Sankey charts that are available are very flexible and can provide so much more meaning to the average analyst, the average marketer who's trying to figure out if this was their end page, what came before that. And with Universal, we could really only do that with the reverse goal funnel. Something had to be defined as a goal in order to look something up from the backwards lens. But in GA4, we can do backwards and forwards and poke around and apply different filters to these areas so that we can get more meaningful information. I don't know about you guys, but I definitely am super tired of explaining bounce rate. We came up with so many, short little quips and analogies, one and done. There's, other sports stuff about bouncing a basketball that I still don't understand how to tell that story. We basically had fun with math for no reason other than to confuse people. And, with GA4, we've got engagement rate, and in some cases, this is really a good inverse of bounce rate. This is a more positive lens of bounce rate, where we are looking at more qualified folks, users who are more likely to convert. So you can, disqualify folks still and say, oh, yeah, they bounced. That metric came back to life within GA4. It's available. It's a little hidden, and I like that part. But I'm a real big fan of engagement rate, and I'm glad in some ways that exit rate is a little bit gone, but we can still recreate those. Pie charts. If none of y'all are, yeah, if you've never heard Tim Wilson go on about hating pie charts, I encourage you to just send him one. Put it on Twitter, put it on LinkedIn. He'll give you a lovely rant. But for better or worse, the use of pie charts here was actually correct. These are 100%. They are parts of a whole. My qualm with them, aside from the fact that, I love pie, just not pie charts, is that there's no rhyme or reason to the colors. It's just, this is the color order that Universal used. And sometimes your colors would match, and sometimes your colors wouldn't match. But above and beyond, these aren't ADA compliant for color contrast. Like, okay, you're just making me mad. Anyway, here are other reports that we don't use. Tree maps. How many of y'all have actually used a tree map report and sent it to a client? I haven't. I saw a client the other day, and somebody told me earlier this morning that they're still using the word cloud. This is a word cloud for keyword search things for their internal site search. Fantastic. So long and thanks for all the fish. We need to know that time isn't holding up and time isn't after us, because we still have the same old things at the ready. This is a screenshot from the Google Analytics Academy, and from many years ago. It's still pretty true. Your data is collected, there's configuration and processing that happen on the Google side, behind the scenes. And, I have, run trainings where I say, this is the behind the scenes magical coding stuff. And then, outspits all of your reports. Now, this is where I'm going to say again that, the administration of your GA4 and of your settings really matter. There are ways that users can modify things on purpose or accidentally that will impact your data. And some of these do not go into change history. There is a way to create additional events within the admin tool. And, the only way that this makes sense to use is for instances where you can only have GTAG, and for a fact that you cannot add GTM to that site. and handle things via the data layer in a scalable and extensible way. They matter a lot. Our little buddy Urchin lives on. It's so great. And what's really cool is we've added some new parameters here. We've got source platform. This could be, DV360. This could be search ads. This could be Bing, for instance. We've got UTM creative format. I've seen things like, landscape versus portrait. I've seen things like screen resolution or display resolutions in here. And then marketing tactic, I've seen things like prospecting, retargeting, or some type of, custom code that, is meaningful to that organization, but doesn't tell the user that they're prospecting or maybe retargeting. And, this is an area that we're going to have to, enforce some guidelines around to the same degree that we pushed on, campaign source and medium for those, custom campaign tracking pieces. We as the analyst community, are going to have to set some guidelines and make some decisions about what should belong here and what shouldn't. What those exact answers are, we're yet to see, but it's something to keep in mind as you're working with your clients, as you're working with your marketing teams and setting up, new ways to do things, or just updating all your links and such across the ads. Measurement protocol. Oh, I was super pumped when this came out for universal analytics, when you could have a server send information straight into Google. It's fantastic. I did it a whole bunch for download tracking when you're hosting PDFs on like a CDN, and then Amazon Web Services can push that up and say, hey, somebody with a direct link came and downloaded this. It was from a Google site search. Fantastic. One of the problems with this, and I don't know how many of y'all were using analytics very regularly during the Trump election, but in 2016, there was a big uptick in what's called ghost spam. And that's where someone who just has a universal analytics tracking ID just starts sending traffic in. They were putting information into the language field, like, vote for Trump, Trump wins, all sorts of stuff like that. They hit a lot of nonprofits with this. Those were my clients back in 2016. So if you, Google Trump and ghost spam, you'll see some articles about, how you can filter that out. What's really super great with GA4 is we've got a secrets key. The API now has the capability to say, hey, only you have access to send me information. When I've worked with some clients using click-to-call with Invoca, for instance, we make sure that the only event that accepts information for them is click-to-call. We want to make sure that, that is the source of truth, and we know exactly how that data is getting into our platform, into our reporting. It's fan-flippin-tastic. And, we may be asking ourselves, am I right? Am I wrong? This is not my beautiful report. I can't share it. And sharing is caring, y'all. We don't have the ability to send a template URL. Template URLs are still really important as we're sort of, QAing some of the pieces of universal analytics and recreating reports in GA4. It's been really helpful to kind of have those, you know, reports in hand to know, how a client or a customer was using this previously and how we need to recreate that report itself within GA4. Because sometimes, the event information alone doesn't ground you in what is their actual end goal. How are they used to seeing this information? Um, we also lose out on email these reports. So, we don't have a way to automatically send even just a one-off, report to an email user. We definitely can't choose in some cases between the file types. Um, and speaking of that, even when you download a file, it doesn't give you any additional information about what you downloaded. A GA4 download will be called data export. Well, what report did I just export? What, actual account or view or property? Oh no, not view. Ha. What account or property am I even in? Am I in dev? Am I in QA? Don't know. It's just data export. How many of y'all are familiar with some vocabulary terms? So I don't know about y'all, but I'm an analyst that says segments, and then I go and try and talk to my paid media folks, and those marketer folks are saying the word audiences. And I'm like, I can make you a segment. I don't know that I can make you an audience. And that was kind of a, big hiccup. So GA4 has given us audiences as kind of a sweet spot. We now have the ability to actually create an audience in GA4, but we also get a little bit crazy with this because of the way that GA4 data exists under and behind the scenes. We have comparisons now in GA4, which are more like the segment comparisons that we would see in, the reporting interface. In the explore area, we can actually create segments and apply them and, change around how our reporting looks. Both comparisons and segments can be turned into an audience. And what is fantastic is that audience is shared across the entire property. Everyone can view that definition and know that that audience exists and use it in reporting. Whereas with segments in Universal, we had to be really smart about how we named them, how we shared them. I used to run into an issue previously where I had made a segment and called it, ABC, and another analyst working on a similar, problem named a segment ABC. And as soon as, we shared those back and forth, we had a conflict. We weren't using the same definition. So now we're able to kind of use GA4 as an equalizer to, create that audience, create those attributes, and share them all. Like, I should have put this slide earlier, but I feel like this also gets into some of the, am I right sort of conversations, because I've only seen third-party tools so far have the capabilities to annotate within GA4. This is an underutilized but ridiculously valuable feature that should have been used a whole lot more. in Universal. When I was an in-house analyst, either myself or an intern would go in weekly and update the annotations so that all of our marketing for email, the main social media sort of themes, the in-person events that happened were all part of our annotations criteria, so that at any time we could know, what was that spike? What was this spike? What, is buried in, this middle part that isn't really a spike? Here we've got a little bit of a dip where we had a new site launch. What about that should have been here? To make sure that, we're looking at this when we break it down into different segments. When we break it down by, say, host name or page path, do we have a solid understanding that, we're looking at this information with the right, lens? Would I say that they should have put in Thanksgiving here? Yes, totally. Veterans Day? Yeah, for sure. Christmas is surprisingly not that low. I don't understand. Or perhaps this is Thanksgiving and this is Christmas and New Year's. I don't know. This is a very old screenshot, so deal with it. Here's a blog article from 2020, or no, 2010. We could also do regex wherever and whenever we wanted. Google is still working on this. It's on the roadmap. Fingers crossed we can actually use regex in places that we need it, because regular expressions are very important to the work that we do and the various ways that people use our site or sites or digital, properties of whatever kind. We need the ability to do more operators and ors. Easy site search reporting. This was a blessing. When I first met some folks that worked at Home Depot, their only job was internal site search. That's all they did. There are lots of companies out there still that, have that kind of focus, from a retailer perspective, from a content perspective, to make sure that, the right things are being surfaced to users that are looking. And we do have built-in site search tracking where, we have view site search as an event within GA4. We have search term as a particular custom dimension or event parameter. Those two terms mean the same thing, by the way. But we don't have a clickable way to say, I want to see all my site search reports. There are filters and layers that you have to apply in order to look at, the search terms that folks are using on the site. Do you get a pre-baked audience that says, these are the folks who use site search? No. I wish you did. And maybe that's coming. I know a lot of the SEO and SEM folks would love to see it too. It's not just the analysts. It's not just the folks who are responsible for making sure that internal site search is operating. And, you may ask yourself, how do I work this? And the big thing that I'll plug here is community. Universal Analytics, grew from Classic, and it had a beautiful community around it. Tons and tons of folks that support one another and help one another, from, code to how do I find this? How do I set this up? Where do I even go? It had many evolutions over time. RIP Google Plus. But now we've got, loads of places to fill with new content, with corrected content for GA4. Stack Overflow isn't going to necessarily go through all of its hundreds of thousands of posts of universal analytics questions and say, this is deprecated. It's on us, the community, to tell these places and to make sure that documentation is up to date, that, something is configured wrong. I don't know if anybody else has seen that there's now a Discord for Google Analytics 4. I've participated a little bit. It's hard to keep up with, I think, and that's kind of where I want to make sure that we as a community understand what it is that we need to do. So this is my other charge for you all, is we need to define, we need to create, and we need to democratize and socialize things that are best practices. And this needs to not be limited to things that you have to pay for. So how do we get started? One of the big things that I started off with was guiding users on how to export their UA data, how to identify what's meaningful, what is important, not just download for download's sake. There are things that Google has said that they are working on. We're still getting questions about a tool to look at UA in Looker Studio from a read-only perspective, but I don't know what that's going to look like at all. We need to generate how-to content, for both GTM, for other tag management platforms, for measurement protocol, for GTM server side, for just coding on top of the G tag. We as an analytics community are responsible for helping that. And we are also responsible for coming up with our own ideas and come to agreement on, some event naming conventions. How do we as a measure community want to see certain types of things tracked? Beyond just the ways that Google has outlined with some of its recommendations, beyond just file download, beyond just scroll tracking being 90%. What are common ways that we want to look at account creation or two-factor authentication, login flows? How do those things stack up in GA4? Where do we need certain types of information? That's on us to help nonprofits, to help our universities, to help, the mom and pop small business that is just trying to get, any information about their site. And so, please help where you can, whether that's, telling a user on Stack Overflow that something is deprecated, answering a question or two in Discord, making sure that you're participating in Measure Slack if you aren't already. Same thing for LinkedIn and Facebook groups and, tons and tons of other sort of ways that, CRO is involved. You'll notice that I didn't even talk about CRO at all. Optimize is gone, and, it's up to the third parties to decide, what A/B testing and, multivariate testing is going to look like. And Google has said that's going to look like audiences. I don't know what it's going to look like from a reporting perspective. Does anyone here? Who's going to lead the charge for making sure that we have a solid understanding of how to report on experiments within GA4? That's part of our communities. So It's the same as it ever was. Same as it ever was. We need to maintain our actual analytics implementations and our measurement strategies to keep up with everything that's changing, from privacy to, consent, all the different ways that digital comes to fruition these days. It's far different than when Urchin got started in the late 1990s. And even more so in terms of, 2012, 2013, when Universal kind of made its debut. So with that, thank you all for listening. Really appreciate your time. You can find me on Measure Slack. You can find me Twitter and Instagram. And here's my work email too, if you need to bug me, but please don't. Just kidding. Thank you all very much.